Today, I am super excited to be speaking with a Middle Eastern American couple. Dr. Sheila Modir is a psychiatric, a pediatric psychologist at the Children's Hospital, and her husband, Jeffrey Kashou, is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a manager of clinical product and service design for a mental health tech company. They wrote a book titled The Proudest Color to help parents and caregivers immerse their children in learning how to counteract negative and harmful messages of discrimination. Welcome to the show, lovely people. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here today and to be able to talk about this important topic.
Yes.
Yeah, we're both very excited. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of mirrortalk podcast. I'm super excited to learn from you, to know more about you. I'm really excited to learn more about your individual stories also. Like, can you tell me about yourselves? How has the journey been, coming from Iran and Palestine and, studying and excelling in the United States? How has that been like for you?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Illinois, which is a state in the U.S. in a pretty small town. Primarily, the population is composed of white Caucasian individuals. Mm-hmm. So I was one of the few Middle Easterners in that town. So I grew up there. And when I was around 16, we moved to California. But both of my parents are immigrants from Iran. So they started, school and work here. They immigrated at different ages in their life. So they had to start over a lot of parts of their life once they came here, but they wanted to have, like many immigrant stories that we've heard, have a better future for their children. Yeah. So they came here and started roots here. And then eventually after Illinois, we moved to California, and I've been in California ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California. My dad's family are immigrants, including my father, from Palestine. And, they kind of the typical immigrant story started in the Midwest and, just kind of scraped together what they could, made their way to California and built a family and a life out here with a larger extended family. Excuse me. But we, growing up, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood and went to school with mostly Caucasian students, and really hadn't been very aware of my culture and ethnicity until actually 9/11 happened. And my high school has, not a lot of Middle Easterners in it. And so when 9/11 happened when I was in high school, there was just a lot of statements, very prejudiced, racist statements. I even had one of my teachers say on 9/11, she turned the TV off and said, what should we do with all those people over there? Should we just nuke them or go to war with them, or what should we do? So it's kind of at that point that I really recognized sort of the differences that were there and the importance of honoring and recognizing my cultural background.
Yes. Like, for both of you, how was it like, growing up in a Caucasian dominant, society? How did you manage that, leaving your home where you're Iranian or Palestinian and parents and family and moving out into a community that is, just Caucasian dominant? How was that like? How was that switch and mixture for you every day?
I think it was actually a little bit of the opposite for me personally, because I grew up in the Caucasian community, but you're right. I would go home. My home was a very Middle Eastern home. Mm-hmm. But then when I moved to California, it was much more Middle Eastern dominant. So in California, there's a lot more diversity. Mm-hmm. So it was such a big shift for me to be in a state, or at least in Southern California, where there's a large acceptance of the Middle Eastern culture. I remember growing up in the Midwest, there were times that I would, especially post 9/11, right? I would pretend to be Greek or Italian and pass as another culture that was more socially accepted and wasn't as heavily discriminated against, because I didn't want to stand out so much. So there were times where I really struggled with my own racial identity and had to really come to terms and understand it better. And then when we moved to California, there was this sudden shift of it's celebrated and people know about it. And I was much more accepted. And I actually started moving towards more of my culture when I came to California, and especially in college. I remember joining a Iranian student group and celebrating the culture there. So there was just a lot more embracing of it, and I think in general, when we're looking at mental health and the different stages of identity development, that is one part of it, is where we are trying to figure out who we are and trying to figure out which culture we're trying to assimilate to, especially children that are of two cultures.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah, and for me, it was, I physically sort of pass as a Caucasian person, and so, it wasn't anything that was like outwardly obvious, but when friends would come over, or I'd be out with like my dad's side of the family, or we would have certain, cultural traditions or things that we would do. It always was a little bit awkward. I had to kind of explain things to friends, but thankfully they were always pretty understanding. There was sometimes the weird comments and looks. I think for me, where I experienced some friction was when people would say, "Oh, what's your background?" And I always had to kind of make a choice. Do I want to say Palestine and then get the eyebrow and then get into the whole conversation around the conflict between Israel and Palestine, or be just judged and ignored, or just kind of say, "Oh, I'm Arabic," or "I'm Lebanese or Jordanian," or whatever. And that still is something that I pops into my head today as I even try to explain it. But I think thankfully with, just kind of the greater acceptance and understanding of culture and race around the world, that's been something that's more easily identified for myself in public. And then I think the other side of it was, for me, not really knowing how to, feeling kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I am very grateful that I get embraced by my wife's Persian side, which is really fun and very welcoming, and I can really tap into Middle Eastern culture in that way. But at the same time, I physically look Caucasian, and so it's like, if I say to Caucasian groups, I'm half Arabic, or I'm Arabic, or identify with that, you kind of raise an eyebrow, and it's like, well, but you're kind of white. And so it's always kind of an awkward place of not really knowing, how to just kind of getting to pick one thing, or do I have to pick one thing, and how that sort of works. So I always feel like I'm having to kind of read a room and read the other person and figure out, what's going to happen there. So that's kind of been my experience growing up and identifying with that.
Yes, you both have said something that, that resonates with me. Like you talked about, embracing who you are, your culture, your ethnicity, your background. That helps you with your mental health, as you said earlier. That's really good. And I kind of see what inspires you to do your advocacy job already. And I would love to say thank you so much for the advocacy work that you do together for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also work towards building resilience in children. That's very inspiring. That's very great. I would still love to ask you, like, what inspired you to embark on this mission and projects together as a couple?
Oh, that's a great question. I think honestly, after George Floyd was murdered in the U.S., there was just a lot of movement as a society to be able for many people to want to work together to be able to progress our country and to be able to share the message of racial justice. And Jeff and I were quarantined together. We're married and we're quarantined together. So we're spending a lot of time together and we're having a lot of these discussions, right? A lot of like, what is this future going to look like? What does this look like for our patients? What will this look like one day for our children? So there's so many conversations about what's happening in the US right now. And we wanted to be able to put together materials and in the form of a book to be able to start having the same conversation that we were having in our family room, in our living room, for children to be able to have with their parents outside of this. And so that was really our initiative for starting the book together. But as you can see from our history, very early on, we went to Belgium together. We volunteered in a Red Cross asylum camp and worked with refugees there. So we really just have this passion of wanting to combine social justice, racial justice, the movement towards progressing diversity and equality. And that's a value that we both have shared from the beginning. And I think that's really drawn us together. We've been together for more than a decade now. So it's been a very fun time where we've been able to work on those values together.
Yes. Yes, I see that those are like, wonderful values that you have together that even helps you to build up your relationship together. Like you have core values to help other people, and that helps you also in your marriage to stay together and also work to do great and wonderful things together.
Yes.
And I really appreciate it because you're not like saying, okay, I've finished from college, I'm now working, I can be comfortable with my life, but you're using what you have, your opportunity to help other people to have better lives also. That's very good. That's impressive. Thank you
That's
so
a
much.
really nice way of putting it. Thank you. I appreciate that. You can be a therapist too. You're so good. These statements. I'm like, wow, I felt very heard right there. Yes.
Well,
it's been.
Go ahead, please, Jeff.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the principles from our world in therapy that I always kind of come back to when working with individuals or just kind of in my own life is like, relationships are really what create something bigger in our world. And this concept of, it's a German word, gestalt, which refers to the whole being bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
And I think as within our marriage, though, we look at like how together can, individually we do a lot of work with a lot of underserved and underrepresented communities, but as we come together, we're able to create things that are even bigger than just ourselves in our marriage, which has been really fun and really fruitful. And we're very grateful to be able to do what we get to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I wish for something like this also for myself. So,
you will find it. I know you will.
Yes, hopefully. So talking about working together, I love to talk about your new book called The Proudest Color, which will be released on the 14th of September, 2021. So it's a book that follows the life of a little brown girl called Zahra, who sees the world in vivid color. She says, for me, brown is more than feeling proud. It is the color I see when I see me. So who is Zahra, and what inspired you to write this book?
You want me to answer?
Yeah, take it away.
So Zahra is exactly how you said. She's this little girl who sees the world in color, like a box of crayons. And the inspiration for that actually came where for my doctoral program, I had to write an autobiography statement about myself. And I wrote about how sometimes I felt like a box of crayons, or I felt like a color that was in a box of crayons that was not used as often, but when I was used, I would make the page much more brighter, much more colorful. So when George Floyd was murdered, and there was a lot of talk around racial justice, and a lot of children were questioning their skin tone, it reminded me of when I was younger, growing up in Illinois, when I was the only kid in my class that looked different or had a different skin tone than the other students there. And when I was looking through a class photo, you can spot me from a mile, like you can know, there she is, she's right there. And and that says something, right, about for all those eyes are drawn to me, and children are very naturally curious from a very young age. They're asking questions of why does someone look different, or why does someone wear like a scarf on their head? They're wanting to know. And so kids would ask me questions like, oh, your skin is darker than mine, because they hadn't seen anything like that. It wasn't probably in their TV shows. It wasn't people that their parents hung out with. The only time they saw someone that had that skin tone was at school, and that person was me. So Zahra's story is based a little bit off of that. It's based off of Jeff's experience as well, where he grew up also trying to understand his culture and his identity, and trying to find pride and meaning in all of that. So we kind of combined both of our backgrounds together as Middle Easterners, especially growing up in a post 9/11 world where our culture and our identity was questioned. And we pulled together materials that from research, really, that's a big emphasis that Jeff and I have, is that if we're going to teach children a method of being able to cope with discrimination or understand discrimination, we want it to be based in literature, in evidence-based studies. So what we did pull from was Dr. Hughes's racial socialization theory, which we can definitely talk about as well, and how if you teach a child to be proud of their culture and of people that look like them, then that could be a method of combating the negative impact of discrimination. So I could definitely unpack that. It's a lot to unpack, but that's a little bit where the inspiration came from.
Wow. So how would you advise, parents or children to be proud or to deal with, issues that takes part of, that deals with, race or racism or racial pride? How do you advise the children or the parents to handle those issues with their children?
Yeah, absolutely. We included a list in our book as well when it comes out. That'll be available for parents that do happen to listen to this. And I want to just kind of even back up and acknowledge too, just to kind of add to what Sheila was saying, was that a lot of immigrants as well to America, and maybe this is your experience as well abroad, is usually the first generation tries to assimilate to the dominant culture, right? And don't be so cultural out in public, and don't that happens in the home, but try to assimilate as much as possible and kind of whitewash yourself in a way. And so this book kind of takes a different angle of let's actually let's cope with discrimination by actually creating pride in oneself and in one's culture and ethnicity, by recognizing those who are similar color or skin tone who are doing great things. And the other one of the reasons we wanted to write this book was, we recognized that there was a need for to write a book that could reach as many brown kids or people of color as possible. And we hadn't quite seen anything like that on the shelf that was also based in sound research. So some of the things we wanted to really convey to parents was to first just kind of check in with yourself, right? We know how much children pick up on even just the attitude of a parent as they walk into a room. Little kids are very perceptive, and they don't quite know how to separate, the parents' feelings from their own sometimes. So it's really helpful for a parent to check in with themselves, notice what they're even feeling as they kind of approach a topic like this. It can be very difficult, very emotional, very frustrating, very, just sad sometimes to kind of approach. So it doesn't mean not to have those feelings. It's just to acknowledge them for yourself so that you can experience them authentically with your child. If you don't acknowledge, let me put it in a positive way, the more that a parent can acknowledge emotions in a healthy way and express them in a healthy way, kids will understand that and not then grow up feeling kind of confused about like, why do I feel maybe frustrated or like an outcast every time I go out in public. The parent can really highlight that for them. Yeah. We also encourage parents to ask open-ended questions. So if any parents of teens know, if you just ask, how was your day? You're gonna get, it was fine. Kind of that grocery store response that you give to the checkout clerk. Yeah. But open-ended questions allow for more fruitful conversation. So tell me about what that was like, for example, or how did you respond when this happened? What were you thinking when you saw this? And it just helps, develop that language around it. And like I said earlier, when it comes to the importance of relationships, you deepen that trust and that openness in a relationship with a child.
I think another thing is that when you're having this conversation with your child, especially around the age of Zahra, she's very concrete thinking. So it's important to even phrase the conversation of race and racism around what's fair and unfair, because children around that age understand what's fair and unfair, right? Like if you give, the example I always give parents is like, if you give the brother 2 cookies and you give the sister 1 cookie, they will understand that there's a discrepancy. So you could use that as a way of being able to launch of how certain groups in our community are not receiving as much as other groups, or are not being able to get their needs met like other groups. And what is that like? And have you seen that happen at school, or has that happened to you? So really being inquisitive about a child's experience and very being concrete, because developmentally they do understand things in that sense. That's important. The little bit more deeper questions like Jeff was talking about, that's great for adolescents when they get older, having a lot more of those in-depth conversations. So there's also being able to read children's books to kids. So I think that's huge. Children project themselves onto the character, right? So they'll see someone like Zahra, or they'll see another character and wonder about themselves, or think that the experience is similar for themselves. So parents could use that as a launching point of deeper discussions of like, oh, what did you think Zahra felt? Or how was that when Zahra went into the school and nobody was, no one really looked at her the same way or looked at her skin tone? Has that ever happened to you? So you could use that as a vessel. I also love Crayola's different skin tone crayons and markers. I think that's really an important tool to have for children when they're using crayons, because not having a color that represents your skin tone is just so, when you're drawing yourself or you're drawing your family. That's huge for a child, right? Because a lot of their world is expressed through art and drawings. So investing in tools like children's books and Crayolas like crayons that have the skin tone representation is also really important. There's just so many other ones. I mean, I think modulating media, I don't know if you want to talk about
that. In terms of just kind of the concept of like modulating media too, it's not that we don't want to encourage parents to like completely shield their children from what's happening in the world, right? We want children to grow up having an honest and authentic experience of what's happening in the world, but that doesn't mean they need to watch some of those videos of police brutality, for example, or people being, experiencing violence or upfront discrimination, because that can be kind of overwhelming to children, right? So are there other ways that, parents should explore? Are there other ways to convey what happened or tell the story of what happened or pick certain scenes even? So really just being mindful of, can you get the point across? Can you convey that or have that fruitful conversation with your child without necessarily having to expose them to something that their brain might not be ready to see yet? I mean, even for myself as an adult and as a therapist, seeing, the video of George Floyd's murder, it was overwhelming for me and is very much seared into my mind. And while it was important for me to see that and understand, how severe and impactful that situation was, I can't imagine having a young child see that. I think there's just many other ways to explain what happened to George Floyd or to others. And there are actually been books written about how I think there's a book called What Something Happened in Our Neighborhood or Something Happened Today, a children's book specifically about how to explain police brutality to children. So that's another suggestion that we have for parents.
Yes, and I think you guys did a wonderful job with the book already, because I was going to the preview and I saw that it's like a beautiful illustration book with so much colors. I mean, that will attract a child to actually pick it up and read it. But is it also suitable for for parents or for people that are looking forward to having kids later in the future? Or is it primarily is it just for the kids or also for parents with the kids?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that, first of all, our illustrator, Monica, did such an amazing job. I mean, the illustrations are stunning. You're right. It's so colorful. It's so colorful. And I think that although this book was written for children, I think that there's still a lot of power and meaning. So we do have a lot of friends that are purchasing it for themselves. So they are very excited to have a book that represents them, right? So as Zahra thinks about who does she look like, her family reminds her, here are all these great people that share your skin tone, who have done amazing things. So if someone at school tells you that they don't like your color of your skin, remember that, Frida Kahlo, Martin Luther King Jr., Barack Obama, our vice president in the US, Kamala Harris is, they're all share your skin tone. And so she can think, oh, these are these amazing people that have gone on and done incredible things. And I one day I'm also an important person and I will one day do an incredible thing. And I think as a kid hearing that message, that's powerful, but also as a teen or an adult, I think that's an important message too. So I think it depends. If you are a collector of children's books and you like it, by all means, I think that would be a great resource for you.
Even if you just love great art, Monica just did such a great job telling a story and bringing it to life, even with some touches of humor. You'll have to wait to see when it comes out, but it's very clever. And those who were involved with the development of the book after we wrote it, and getting it to a physical thing, even conveyed to us, if they were individuals of background of color, conveyed how much it kind of helped them even realize, like, oh, growing up, like my mom's skin tone was lighter than mine, and people always question, was she even my mom? And so this book kind of helped them recognize an experience that they had looking backwards, and then how they can kind of feel proud about their skin tone as a result. So I would say, it's not going to, I would encourage adults to buy it and just for the art and for the experience and just as a way to hold on to and recommend to other friends and families too.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the book. I'm going to put the link to your website for the book in the show notes for this episode. But the book is going to be available on Amazon and other book outlets from the 14th of September 2021. So I will encourage everyone to pick it up. For people like me who love to read books with illustrations, also please pick it up.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yes. So please, can you talk to me about the impact of of racial trauma on our mental health? I know both of you are experts in mental health. What's the impact of racial trauma on our mental health, and how can we develop, resilience against it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that, so part of my dissertation research was actually studying the impact of discrimination on the Middle Eastern American community. And in order for me to study the Middle Eastern community, I had to look at research across all the different communities as well, because for the Middle Eastern community, there's not a lot of research. So I needed to pull from other communities, understand their experience. And one of the things that really came out of it is that we know that there's very clear-cut research that discrimination impacts mental health, has led to depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and really has people questioning their self-esteem and feeling like they've lost control and power when they've experienced discrimination. So we do know that is a line that has been correlated. And so the next step is, now that we know that it causes that level of trauma within us, what do we do about it? And so that's really where the work is in trying to build the resilience. One of the ways of building resilience is something called racial socialization. So racial socialization is the message that we use in our book. It has different components to it. So with Dr. Hughes's research, one component was helping, which we had written about, is called cultural socialization, which is instilling cultural pride in a child, reminding them of traditions, of important people in their culture, of people that share their skin tone and have gone on and done important things. That has been helpful. Because all of a sudden, when you experience discrimination and someone says, I don't like your skin tone, you can say, well, Barack Obama was president. And he looks like me. So, and you can use that as a buffer for yourself. You can talk to yourself and say, hey, like, these are these important people that I can carry in my heart that have done really great things. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is preparation for bias. So that means that having the honest conversation that I know that a lot of Black families in the US have had to have with their children about this might happen to you just because of your skin color. You might get pulled over by a cop, or you might experience something at a store, or whatever the case might be for you. So having those conversations, although initially the research has found could have a child question, their background, being able to do it in a way that is informative, and you're trying to instill safety in a child, because there's a reality in the world that you cannot always protect them from. And then also instilling the cultural pride, that can also have positive results on their mental health. The third thing that they have found in the research is promotion of mistrust. And that means if you tell children at a young age, don't trust this group, don't trust that group, because this is what they're going to do to you, that actually is a negative impact on mental health. That doesn't serve as a buffer for the child, because now the child is going out into the world questioning all their social interactions and all the people that they come across based off of the messages that were communicated. So ultimately, if we look at all of these different modes, these are all three modes of communication to a child. It's up to a parent to decide which road they want to take and how they want to take it, and what tools they want to use to communicate messages of race and racism. And through the way that you communicate, you build your child's resilience. And that's one big component that we talk about, and that we're hoping that the book could be. Because when I was looking at when we were both looking at our patients, I was like, man, I wish I really had a book that could remind them how important they are. And I just remember there's all these pictures online of kids pressing their hands against the TV screen when Barack Obama was being sworn in. I think I was doing it too. It was such a, it was such an impactful moment where I remember during those 8 years, I would walk around being like, I have a president that looks like me. I have a president that knows my culture, that understands me. And I think that that's what we both wanted in our book, was like, we wanted to be able to have a place in the book where a kid could say, oh yeah, there you go. Like, there's the people that look like me and they're really important. And that builds that resilience against stress and negativity.
Yeah. And one thing I would also just kind of add to what you're saying is that, to your earlier question of like, what's the impact on mental health? It's we see that increase of mental health symptoms like depression and anxiety and trauma, but then there's the impact that has on one's day-to-day life. And Sheila's research specifically was on college students. And so, that racial discrimination, that racial trauma led to students questioning whether they could stay in school or not doing as well in their classes as they normally would. We also have the flip side of the kind of model minority discrimination, where it's like you're expected to be perfect, right? A lot of the times the Asian community experiences that, where that can lead to a lot of stress and a lot of burnout and a feeling of needing to be perfect and what happens if you're not. So you have, kids not, adjusting to college very easily, not, feeling isolated, dropping out. We see it in the workplace a lot. We've known that for a long time. And so, even what we just watched in the Heights last night. Yeah, the Lin-Manuel Miranda film or a musical, and we won't spoil it too much. It happens fairly early on, but one of the main characters decides, is kind of questioning her if she can actually maintain at Stanford University, coming from Washington Heights in New York, and
after experiencing a lot of discrimination at Stanford and being questioning her place in it and her role. So I think that it was an accurate description of like the stress of discrimination carries on multiple levels for you individually, within your community, within society, and has a rippling effect because you're constantly questioning your sense of belonging. And when our sense of belonging is challenged, that is really one of the main things that leads to mental health symptoms.
Toby, I'm curious, if it's okay to ask you,
yes.
Being in Germany, what's your experience been like? I don't know if you've had any sort of questions or thoughts for yourself or experiences that are relevant to this.
Yeah. So for me personally, I've been blessed not to, have any racial issue with the Germans, but I have friends, I have, close people, colleagues that have really experienced, racial issues, like being insulted or being maltreated because of this color of their skin, because of their, where they come from. Yeah. Yes. So it has always been like for me, it's always been a burden, like, stepping out every day out of my comfort zone, out of my apartment, going out into the world, like, oh my God, let today just be a wonderful day in which I'm not, confronted because of my skin color or because of of where I come from, actually. But yeah, it has always been that every day, preparation, mental preparation that today anything might happen, but I'll be ready for it. I'll let it go with grace and poise.
That takes that's a toll that it takes on the body every single day, right?
Yes.
And,
that others don't have to worry about, those who don't have to think about that can just walk out the door and go about their day. It's just, closing the doors is a thing you don't even have to think about.
Exactly.
Yes. But I'm glad to hear that you haven't had any direct experiences of it.
Not yet, but every day, if we want to step out into the supermarket or just get into the bus, I'm like, anything might happen, but I will make sure that I am my best. I'm my best behavior, no matter what happens. Yes.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you letting me ask that and putting you on the spot.
And no, it's fine. It's perfect. But for people out there, like my friends, for example, that have, gone through this kind of trauma, for example, how do you expect us to, or what's the best way to address all these trauma symptoms and behaviors that, result from being racially abused or, insulted?
I think that one of the biggest things is seeking mental health services, right? So being able to have someone to be able to process this with and talk to. Psychology has a really big emphasis on diversity and being able to, there's a lot of literature on it. It's courses that we've taken as psychologists and therapists to be able to prepare us for this role. And so it's really an honor and privilege to be a therapist, to be in a room with someone that's experiencing pain and being able to be the person to hold that pain and help them process it. And so I think that being able to seek services, if that's something that's needed, is so important.
I'll add too. It's I think especially challenging for communities of color. I'm painting with a very broad brush here, so I say this, kind of couched in that, but oftentimes communities of color still experience kind of higher rates of stigma and shame and hesitancy to embrace mental health treatment. And that's understandable. And it's not to say like, okay, but just go seek it anyways. I think what's an important shift for us to recognize is, one, family is a tremendous source of resiliency and coping, and where one feels comfortable to embrace that. when I worked in residential treatment, where somebody would actually have to live in a treatment center, parents would always look at us and say, I don't know if I'm making the right decision. I think they're going to be mad at me, and so on. And we would always say, you can only be someone's treatment for so long as a family, right? And you'll have to kind of identify what that line is. And I think families offer a lot. And also there's kind of a line that needs to be looked at. I think once it's starting to impact your day-to-day life, especially, that's, you're kind of right at that point where it's a good time to check in on that. I think additionally, mental health, just like physical health, exists on a spectrum, right? It's not like you get fit one day and then all of a sudden you're good to go. You don't have to work out. You don't have to eat healthy again. You don't have to get good sleep, right? Yeah. And so it always kind of is a shifting target, especially with our mental health. And so I say that because there isn't this like demarcation line between good mental health and then being mentally ill. There's a continuum there. And I think we've identified, or we've kind of artificially put out there this wedge between, well, I'm not mentally ill. It's like, no, maybe you don't qualify specifically for a diagnosis, but it's a spectrum. It's not just a switch that turns on and off. And we don't have these two sets of our population of the mentally ill and the mentally healthy. And so I think when we can make it more natural and approach it more kind of organically in that way of, anybody can kind of move in and out, and it's to varying degrees. I think it encourages a greater acceptance of mental health treatment and utilization of it. The other thing is, therapy can be very time limited or brief, or there are also other avenues into it, finding, I think Sheila, you mentioned the Iranian cultural group, for example.
Yeah, cultural organizations are huge. Religious organizations are really big. So after experiencing discrimination and someone makes you feel like the out group or the other, people have found comfort in seeking others like them, that look like them, share their same culture, whether it's in a group or they go to see a cultural show or they go to a cultural movie, whatever it is, to be able to reinstill that for them, where they do feel like they belong in some sort of group is really important for their mental health.
Yeah. Something else I would mention is, when it comes to trauma is really in the brain is held on to as an event of, if we think about it from an evolutionary perspective, where we have this drive to survive, a traumatic event gets held on to in the brain because it was either so overwhelming that the brain doesn't quite know how to digest what just happened, or because, it was so overwhelming and it needs to kind of keep itself ready again because it wasn't expecting that and is always sort of on guard. And really what this comes down to is that your sense of control over your sense of safety is sort of shaken. It's on shakier ground or even demolished completely. And so recognizing that one, something happened to you, but that you're not bad or that you're not damaged in some way. And that shame and stigma is what prevents people from getting help. It's similar when we talk about like, what it's recognizing what is in your control and what isn't, and recognizing this happened to you, you didn't choose for it to happen. What also is in your control, and a way to start to rebuild that sense of control and safety for yourself is, finding expressions of it, even if it's an artistic one, even if it's writing down what happened and finding ways to externalize it so then you can view it at a distance. Weighing the evidence of, am I safe now? How can I keep myself safe now? What are my resources to keep myself safe going forward? And recognizing, when I don't have control, then how do I manage that?
Yes. I would love to pick up from what you said earlier, that, you said mental health, being mentally healthy and mentally ill is not like an on and off switch. Like there's a fine grade in between that. I know the media, what we watch on in TV or in films nowadays is always like, it's either you are mentally healthy or you are ill or mentally ill. And this is why I also appreciate, what you do in the, film and television production. You do some consultancy, including for I think for Disney and for FreeForm also. You do to ensure that a mental health is portrayed responsibly. So what are some misconceptions about mental health, and how is it meant to be portrayed in films and in television, so that we could learn from them properly?
Oh man, yeah, it's been great. It's been a wonderful opportunity that this organization exists for us to be able to consult on television and film programs. We've seen you know, not that long ago, only several years ago, we saw that, you know, mentally ill almost treated like that film One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest, right? Or it was like the person that was, you know, disheveled or just, you know, it was kind of always portrayed as sort of the extreme. And it's not to say that that doesn't exist in the world. It certainly does, but that's not the preponderance of those who have mental health challenges. You know, we are seeing a more accurate portrayal where somebody will just more openly express, you know, hey, I have depression, or I take this medication, or, you know, I've got panic disorders. We're seeing a lot more of that, which is really great. And I'm by no means going to complain about that explicit portrayal of it, because I think that's how we have to start to break through. It's kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum so that we can find the middle. My hope is, you know, we kind of get away from the need to really highlight that as a component of a film or of a character, you know, and that it's just kind of like right in the middle. It's just one aspect, one facet of somebody's, you know, life, and it's not the only thing. We've made a shift, for example, for saying, you know, the schizophrenic to saying the person with schizophrenia or
Diagnosed with.
Yeah, exactly. And that way, it's just not, that's not the only thing, right? It's, you're so many other things.
You are not just your disorder, right? It's just, we are working towards destigmatizing, I think, as a society. And I think that there's shows like This Is Us or Never Have I Ever, or, you know, that you see that the person just goes to a therapist and talks about their feelings or talks about their backgrounds or talks about their racial identity. And so I think there's so much more of like, finally, there's movies and shows demonstrating that you can talk to a therapist about any number of problems. It does not have to be the extreme. And our role in terms of being able to be consultants is great because we get to see the script in advance, read the script, sometimes they'll send us the clip after they filmed it, and we're giving feedback along the way. So most recently we had a show that we did and we provided feedback about how the therapist was asking certain questions. And we thought, okay, the therapist sounds like it's a great question, but I think if we phrase it another way, that would be more sensitive to what's going on for the patient. And so, and the script was, they actually made the changes to it. So I love that Hollywood is responding to it and really taking in our input, and then they were like, oh, here's some more. And so the more that we do it, the more that they give us, and it's exciting. And so we're really enjoying being able to make sure that mental health is portrayed accurately, because I think that's not just our responsibility as therapists, is to be able to get that message out there.
To add to that too, the thing I'm really grateful for is that mental health is portrayed less and less as kind of in that Hollywood fairy tale way of, you know, this person is depressed and then they go to one therapy session and snap their fingers and everything is better. That they're showing it more realistically. And in that vein, that they're portraying mental health with, in the light of that, there's also hope in the ability for progress and change. It's not like a death sentence, for example.
Yes, that's very awesome, because, you know, sometimes when you watch movies and you watch out some therapy session, like never ever will I ever enter into a therapist's office because I don't want to be asked questions like this in this form, in this way. And it's awesome that you know you have the influence on this movie, so that by the time people like us are watching movies next time, like, yeah, it's actually not bad to speak with a therapist. It could be very good. It could be very helpful for my health, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So from your expertise, like as a marriage and family therapist, how can people reduce psychological distress and also promote and improve overall functioning and well-being of each member of the family, especially for mixed family or for colored family in a, you know, Caucasian society?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just to kind of hit your question broadly for a moment, it's about, you know, breaking away from seeing these things as individual categories, right? Your physical health, your mental health, your financial health, your, you know, occupational health, they're all connected, right? And when we can see that any one thing that we do, how it can sort of feed the other things, or any one thing we don't do, how it can take away, is really important, right? If we can emphasize with children and in relationships early on, sort of just an honest look of it, you know, is what I'm about to do going to nourish or deplete me? And think of it in that way. And how does that kind of set me up for the rest of my day or for the rest of what I want to do? You know, when we can foster an acceptance of what is, then we can approach things honestly and make decisions that are in our best decision. So for example, you know, I'll use physical health for a moment, right? If you find yourself, reaching for that extra cookie or that extra, scoop of ice cream.
Yeah.
I think most people already have the answers in them, around, what's good for them and what isn't. And so if we can help somebody actually learn to pause, this comes from my work in mindfulness, to pause and identify, okay, wait, I'm kind of doing this a little impulsively. And with reducing that shame around like, well, you're wrong for doing this, stop doing it, stop being such a fatty and whatever, that, those horrible things that we tell ourselves that we would never tell another human being, right? You would never tell your partner that, or a friend. Maybe guys, we rib each other a little bit more tough like that. But, to say, okay, so what is this about? Or, do I really want this right now? Or am I just going for it impulsively? Or how do I best take care of myself in this moment? So when we can create that pause, then we can ask ourselves those questions. And then I really believe that the answers are already in us and will naturally just start to surface of like, maybe I'm just a little bit tired and this is kind of how I'm trying to take care of myself. But you know what, maybe instead I just need to take a rest and not nourish myself with more ice cream. When it comes to mental health, it's like, a lot of us can be attached to our work, and it's recognizing, what am I about to do, or what am I about to step into? And am I doing too many things at once? When we feel ourselves getting stressed, like not to lean in further, but instead to kind of lean out and take care of ourselves. So that's kind of a broad take of mental health in general. I would hope families would take away from this. With regards to families of color, I don't know, Sheila, if you want to take that question on.
I think we did mention a little bit earlier of like ways to be able to navigate racial identity within families of color. I think that I unfortunately the burden is so much more on families of color to have to prepare their child and to talk with them. I'm reflecting on just what you had said earlier of like every time you step out the door, it's like you have to get ready for what might happen, and you have to mentally prepare yourself for the response that you're going to have to give, which you feel like it has to be a positive one, or else things could go really differently, right? As a parent, we are constantly anticipating these different scenarios that could happen to our child as they leave the home or go to school or wherever they're going. And so I think that so what parents can do is have these conversations early and often, and have that preparation talk with them while also reminding them of the wonderful things that they are, and beyond just the racial identity, but all the other characteristics that they might hold. They might be really good at math, or they might be really great artists, or whatever the case might be. And so that's why, with even going back to the book with Zahra, she loves being the color brown. She loves her skin tone. She's also an artist. She loves being an artist. And I think that having those strengths together really makes this character someone that's very relatable to children. So I think with communities of color that are navigating discrimination, racism, racial trauma, definitely being able to feel validated that other communities are not having to do this, and what they're doing is very is challenging.
Yes. So, like, if you want to raise a child like Zahra, can you give me like some tips from your experience so far, some tips and some ways to have a very happy and successful family that could accommodate Zahra in my life, or in our life as a family?
Yeah, the first thing I said, earlier with, kind of checking in with yourself. There's Dan Siegel's work. He's a physician, right? Or psychiatrist. He has a book called Parenting from the Inside Out, and how
really great book.
Yeah, when you can really be aware of what you're bringing to the table or the interaction with the child, it creates a very fertile bed for healthy communication, healthy relationships, and going back to what I said just a moment ago, an honest acceptance of what's really happening right now. One of my favorite things that I talk about in couples therapy, for example, is really paying attention to the language that we use, also staying away from absolutes like you always do this, you never do that, right? And finding that gray area in language of like, this is happening right now, but I've also recognized when you've done this. So getting away from the all or nothing thinking. Also replacing the word but with and that again creates more of a texture in conversation. These are little adjustments, but kids who, when they're not so good at abstract thinking, or can be a little bit more concrete, like Sheila mentioned earlier, benefit from hearing that, yes, the world can be unfair, and acknowledging that. And instead of saying, but do the best that you can, and so on and so forth. Yes, the world is unfair, and we as a family celebrate ourselves and we do this, this, and that. And that way it allows two things to be true at the same time, instead of it being a binary thing of one is true and the other isn't. We kind of say that everything before the but in a sentence kind of just gets erased by whatever follows it. So true. I think language is incredibly important, and recognizing the energy and the tone that we bring ourselves, and parents need to acknowledge the stress and anxiety and trauma and challenges that they have as well. And you know, we say in families or in couples, it's like you have to bring your best version of you to the relationship too. It can't just be on the other person that needs to change and grow and listen and so on.
Yes.
Oh, that's really good.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really awesome. So before we wrap it up, yeah, I would love to get some also more insights from you, like personal advice from you. Like, you know, you're a very happy married couple and you live in this sunny Southern California. You enjoy spending weekends, you know, perfecting the recipe for chocolate chip cookies and finding I read this and I was like,
research.
I love it.
I was so impressed by when I read this. I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. This is so dreamy, like wonderful. So it's so sweet, exactly. So from your years of marriage together, how do you spice up your relationship and how do you cultivate, you know, a happy and prosperous life together?
Gosh. We just have a lot, and I think, well, I was going to say we have a lot in common, but then I was like, well, no, we have a lot of different interests too. And I think that that's the beauty of it. We can come together on certain things that we're very passionate about, but then we also allow space for the other person to be able to experience their individual hobbies and interests. So we are able to navigate that, I believe, in a healthy way. I think that we have a lot of fun together. So we go on adventures, even like if we did something small, like we like to pick different cities in Southern California, and we pretend that we're tourists, and we go to different cities, and we just like to check it out and go to different restaurants that way. I don't know, there's just so many different ways that I think ultimately one of the biggest things is communication, right? Mm-hmm. So I think how we are able to communicate, and I think with couples, it takes a long time to understand another person's communication style, right? So you are literally living with, you know, you start living with someone, and now, you know, you grew up with your family and now you're living with somebody else, and now you're learning their communication style, and it's learning to not be reactive, to taking a beat, to being able to start thinking, okay, if I'm reactive to everything, like, you know, when my mom would say, go clean your room, I could be like, I don't want to, or whatever. You can't really do that in a romantic relationship, right? You have to be like, okay, well, I wonder if I could clean the room later, and then we can, you know, go out to eat or something like that, right? So you're rephrasing things, you're taking that beat, you're being mindful in the work that you're doing together, because our biggest thing that we've always said is that we are a married couple, but we're also teammates. Mm-hmm. We're working on the same team. So everything that we're working towards in terms of goals and the world that we're building together, the lives that we're building together, if I have to remember that he's on my team. So when I'm upset with, how do you work as a teammate, right? You have to have that communication with them. You have to take be in talk with them. I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Some of my favorite learnings in therapy and marriage and family therapy comes from Sue Johnson, who has this whole modality called emotion focused therapy. And
really,
without getting really into the weeds on it, the principle, so the essential principle is so easy. It's really just listening first as a partner. You know, obviously I have the magical skill, if you will. I'm kidding, but the skill of being able to, and we both do, understanding, you know, kind of what's happening beneath the surface with each other, of like, you know, if I kind of snap, for example, and because yes, we have, as you said, we have very blessed to have a very loving and happy relationship, but it's by no means perfect. And I want to be authentic about that, right? You continue to grow and build together as life changes and you move through life together. But it's that idea of like listening first. And while we can sort of recognize what's happening with them under the surface, it's then asking questions, right? And checking our own assumptions of what's happening, because, you know, we bring with us to a marriage or to a relationship all the stuff from our past, all the relationships, and, you know, kind of going back to that survival lens, it's like we try to predict and control what's happening in our world. So if you know, Sheila, for example, you know, comes home a little bit in a huff, for example, from work, I might initially assume, oh, you know, she's mad at me, right? Because of my own background, for example. But if I pause and I listen and I ask questions, hey, what's going on for you? You seem like, you know, things might be a little bit rough at the moment, then I can learn, and then she can teach me what's happening for her, and then I can then make a more authentic in the moment assessment and decision from there, ask her what she needs from me, even if it is just to maybe have a little bit of space. Not to put you on the spot, that's not an actual example from us, but so it's really just listening and asking questions and being inquisitive to what's really happening.
Yes. Thank you so much for the advice. I'll make use of that. Yes. So
you're already very skilled at it.
I know, you're great with it, Toby. I think you're fine.
Thank you so much. So regarding the book that's coming on the 14th of September, 2021, The Proudest Color, are there other things you would love to talk about? Like you love to share with the audience, with the listeners, in anticipation of the book, or
well, we're really excited for it to come out, and that I think that they will really enjoy it. And I'm just
we're extremely obsessive people when it came to this process. We really looked at like, how do we make every component of this book, meaningful. I mean, every word that we chose, impactful, and so it was really brought to a very important space. I think the one thing that I'm really excited about is, we wanted to leave the book, the end of the book, with an opportunity for ongoing growth and learning. So it wasn't just kind of like cover to cover. So we've included in the end pages individuals who some might recognize from communities of color, and others who are probably lesser known. And the idea is for parents to engage their kids to say, who is this person? Let me go learn about this other person from my background, or from another cultural background who shares my skin tone. And the idea is then creating that curiosity in not just one's own culture, skin tone, but in others too, right? If we as a world can, and I'm going to be very idealistic here, but I think as we as a world can show more interest in each other, whether it's culture, ethnicity, race, or just individually, like you're asking us all these questions now, I think there's just greater acceptance and understanding, empathy, and appreciation for each other.
Yes, I think it's not just a book that's filled with fun and beautiful illustrations, but it's a book that was written by expertise, people like a pediatric psychologist, and also a licensed marriage and family therapist together. So that's like not just a book for fun, but a book that is filled with a lot of wonderful and important information that we could make use of.
Yes, based in science.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what's the best way to work and connect with you, for people out there who would love to connect with you and work with you?
Yeah, definitely. We have the Proudest Color website, so they could go to that, our website. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Sheila's Bookshelf. So that is where I have a list of books that have mental health themes, to be able to promote children's books that promote emotion identification, emotion regulation, and different things like that. And I have a Twitter at Dr. Sheila Modir.
Awesome. So what about you, Jeff? Do you have?
No, I'm not, nothing really out there in terms of social media. Sheila's done a great job with it. So
he's in charge of the Proudest Color website. So
so that's the proudestcolor.com. Yeah.
Yes. So I'll place all of this information in the show notes for this episode. So anyone wants to connect with Sheila, anyone wants to connect with Jeff, or just read about the book and order the book from the 14th of September, can do that, or even pre-order already from now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. This is a pleasure.
Bye.
That's sweet.